get into the presentation. So so how do people transform? Let's leave that. A few references as well. The theory of spiral dynamics comes from Professor Clare Graves. That's from 1974. It's not a recent thing, but the more it's been tested, the more true it's been found to be. And all developmental psychologists are really catching up with Graves now. It was taken forward by Don Beck and Chris Cowan, and then taken on by Ken Wilber, Alan Coombs, and then there's other theory that's integrated here from Carol Gilligan, Robert Keegan, and Howard Gardner, who are all professors at Harvard. So, structure of the presentation, I'm going to give two stories at the start. Then I'm going to talk about icebergs and life conditions. Then I'm going to talk about the integral map, and we'll go into the main part of the presentation, which is about spiral dynamics. I'll talk about subjects and objects, and then we'll have the Q&A at the end. First little story here is about wicked problems. And I'm sure you've all played a game like this when you've been a child at a fairground. You might have played it if you've been an adult. It's good fun. So, of course, the moles are popping up. You don't know which one's going to pop up next, and you have to hit them on the head. Now, if you wanted to find out which mole's going to pop up next, what you'd need to do is to look, look under the dashboard there, to look under the surface. So when we see things on a surface level like these problems, we can know that they're interconnected at a certain level. But when we're looking at one level, from one level of consciousness, we just can't perceive it. So this is quite a good analogy for wicked problems that I think it's Einstein that said that the problems caused by one level of consciousness cannot be solved by that same level of consciousness. This is the definition of a wicked problem. And the second little story that interrelates with it is a story used by Ken Wilber to describe the difference between states and stages. So it's from a book called Zen at War, which details war atrocities done by the Japanese in World War II against the Chinese. And what it shows was that there was some very senior, very advanced Zen monks who were massively complicit in some of these war atrocities that took place. Now, these people also were enormously well-practiced meditation sitters. And so the question comes that for people who are very advanced meditation practitioners, how can they behave in a way that would certainly be described as nationalistic, and today would probably be described as racist? And Alan Coombs and Ken Wilber deliberate on this. This was a big spiritual conundrum for people to look at. And what they suddenly found was that the adult development, spiritual development of humans has two streams to it. It has a stream of waking up, which is state development, and it also has a stream of growing up, which is stage development. This is all very grounded stuff. A lot of this is out of Harvard University. There's nothing woo-woo about it. And so the state development work has been, a lot of the practices have come out of the East, out of meditation schools. So the practices of sitting there in meditation over and over again with the, things coming into awareness. So owning whatever's coming up, but not identifying with it. But there's also the stages of consciousness. And even in these deep meditation states, these stages of consciousness couldn't be discovered. And stages of consciousness were discovered by Western psychologists studying people and asking them the same question on particular capacities over and over again over long periods of time. So that might be on morals or cognitive development or interpersonal development. And what they found was, with all these things, is that human beings emerge in very distinct stages that can be measured. And the reason that these stages can't be perceived in meditation, because even in that meditation space with people with their eyes closed, what is being interpreted within that meditation space is still going through the lens of the stage that people are at. So states are interpreted through stages. So they're interrelated, but they're different things. So different pathways of development. And also we can have state emergence. So state emergence, for those of you who know a bit about meditation, we can go from our gross consciousness that we're in at the moment, gross state. And then we can go into subtle with meditation practices or certain body works. Then hopefully we move into causal state, and then hopefully get into non-duality, as it goes higher and higher. But then there's also the stages. But all of those states can happen at any stage, but they're always interpreted through the stage, because the stages are learned things. They're learned through our environment. And so as soon as we're talking about something, it's gone through our stage, because language is a learned thing. It had a beginning and it has an end. So let's bring those together with this systemic change iceberg. So if a system is a collection of parts in dynamic relationship with each other, and we're all systems, but I'll use an example of an organization as a system here with like the Findorn Foundation. So we have, if you go into the Findorn Foundation and you look on the wall, you'll see events that are happening that day. And you don't need to spend long in a system to find out events that are happening. You can go into any organization and generally find out what's going on. If you spend a bit longer in a system, you'll start to see that there's patterns to those events. And so you can start to study them. And this is, if you want to create change, you start to change patterns, you'll change the events as well. Then if you spend much longer in a system, you'll start to see the structures that are really very fundamental to how the show is being run. So you get, things like management structures. How do we deal with conflict? These sort of things, these deep patterns of how organizations are run. And when many consultants go into organizations to create change, and the same with people as well, often they go down to this structural level and they start to change the structures. Now, the structures for sure will start to change the patterns and events, but they won't change wicked problems. To change, if you've got wicked problems in systems, again with people or organizations, you need to go below the structures to the mental models and the life conditions that are sitting right at the bottom, that are creating the worldview that's creating the rest of the system above it. And those mental models and life conditions, what we might call nature, are in a co-creative relationship with each other. And this is where we move into spiral dynamics. This is what spiral dynamics is about. So the integral map pulls together a number of pieces to show how humans grow. And those, all these pieces are very well researched, and the people who did the research in these areas found that when they'd completed their research and they started to test what they'd done to help people grow up faster and in a less traumatic way, a lot of these researchers said, actually, I expected people to start growing hugely, really quickly, and they didn't. They just grew a little bit. And what Ken Wilber did was Ken Wilber put himself in a room with all these different well-researched pieces, and he says there's a connection point between these. And what he came up with was realizing that all these maps, these partial maps, were, they all came together as a bigger map. They were just part of a greater whole. And when you put all of these maps together on top of each other, suddenly you've got a multi-dimensional map. And what you find is that when you assess people for which is their area on those maps that needs attention, usually you find a common thread that goes all the way through those different maps. And this is what integral coaching does. So it starts to identify like a very small acupuncture point in the energetic system to start to release energy. So the parts of the integral map are states. So we've just been chatting about states, about the meditation states. There's also quadrants, levels, which is going to be the spiral dynamics, lines, types, holons and drives. And we'll touch on some of these very briefly and on some a little bit more. So the first one is quadrants. And all these have a bit of a shape with them as well, you'll notice. And what you'll see with quadrants is that everybody has an inside and an outside, and everyone has a singular and a plural. You can apply this to absolutely anything, but I'm going to use it here with people. And what you find is that, I've got my interior world at the moment, my upper left area, what my thoughts are inside that no one can see. I've also got what I'm doing with my body, exterior here. So that's my upper right area. There's also a wee space here. As we're on this call, there's the thoughts that we've all got inside. We can't see them, but it's our internal space as a collective. And we've also got our systems as well. So we've got our collective, our agreement to be here tonight. We're on a Zoom call, which is holding this call together. It's external to us, external and collective. And what you find is with people is that people have a tendency.
Yeah, that's my screen there. I've just covered it.
Sorry, just changed. So people have a tendency. People have a home quadrant. They have a secondary quadrant. They have a third one that backs it up, and they have a quadrant that they don't like. And because this affects how we approach life. So people who have a home quadrant of upper left always talk about my feelings. Well, I'm not sure I should do that. I'd need to check in with my feelings. People who have an upper quadrant, home quadrant, they're the doers. They just get stuff done. They're like, I don't really want to talk about it anymore. I just want to get things happening. People with a lower right orientation, they're people that will always check, well, what does the research say? I want to check with the research first before I do anything. And then the lower left quadrant people who orientate from there they'll always, well, how do we all feel about it? You know, and they're the people who are really good at like group processes and stuff like that, very comfortable in it. But as I say, we all have a shadow quadrant as well. So these shadow quadrants can also bump up against each other. These can be part of triggering, so that you can have, say, for example, someone who orientates from upper right can get really frustrated with too much discussing about feelings in the collective. So you can start to get bumps there. So it's good to look at that and start to find which quadrant out of those, the quadrant that you don't feel so comfortable in. With typologies, Integral uses the Enneagram quite a bit, but I'm not going to go into that tonight. It's just too big. But one of the important typologies it uses is, of course, gender. And what you'll find, of course, that we can have masculine and feminine energy that can show up in any form in male and female bodies. But masculine energy has a tendency to show up more in male bodies, and feminine energy has a tendency to show up more in female bodies. And this was looked at by a researcher called Carol Gilligan, and she was one of the main feminist theorists in the world. And she did research with a chap who was looking into moral development called Lawrence Kohlberg. And what they were finding in their research was that at a certain level of moral development, men were developing much quicker through the research than women were. And she was saying, I'm not sure that's right. And she started to do research on the testing facility itself. And what she found was that the tests were written in a male voice. And she gives an example to show the difference between male and female, or masculine and feminine thinking patterns. And she uses an example of going to a kid's baseball game in the States, and it's 3 strikes and they're out, and the boys are there playing baseball. There's one kid waiting for the ball, 3 strikes go past him, and the other lads go, oh, you're out. And he stands there crying because there's a little bit of an audience there. And she says the boys stand there quite impassively, because for the boys it's an initiation ceremony into the world of rules, and boys will sacrifice the feelings to save the rules. And she says there's a girl there watching, she sees the boy crying, and she runs up and gives the boy a hug to make him feel better. So that feminine energy will sacrifice the rules to save the feelings. So these are tendencies in terms of how we start to relate to life around us. So this brings us on to spiral dynamics. So spiral dynamics shows the interrelationship that life conditions drive our mental models. You can use spiral dynamics or any of the stages development systems to show that this is what we go through from birth up to where we are now, but it's also how we've gone through humanity as a whole. And I always present this from a historical perspective because it brings a lot of insight to it. What it shows is that when we say came out as primates, just coming into the first humans, we came into life conditions A. And in order to, those life conditions A had a certain set of problems with them that required that we produced a mental model N to meet those life conditions. And over time, that mental model starts to operate on the environment. And without changing any of its ideas at all, it starts to change its own environment. It makes it more complex. And what happens is a new set of more complex problems emerge. So that's complex problems B. And in order to meet that set of complex problems B, the new mental model needs to emerge to meet that, which is O. And so on we go in life, and these mental models go on and on and on. And what we're seeing is that these first mental models, so to move from, say, A to B, that might have taken 50,000 years. But as we're growing up nowadays, this first stage happens in the first 18 months, 2 years of life. So they're getting more and more compressed down in time scales. I'm sure any of us on the call tonight, we're very likely that people are at kind of orange to green or green onward stage consciousness, and we'll describe this process as we go through. Also within this are lines of development, so that this growth of these capacities, we're all born with these innate capacities that grow up through the spiral in relationship with our life conditions. So the main lines that we have within us are cognitive, logical, interpersonal, intrapersonal, somatic, moral, spiritual, and will. So in relationship with our life conditions, certain ones of these will grow quicker, and certain ones of those, if we've had certain family backgrounds or upbringings, might not be so well developed. The important ones here are cognition and will. And cognition is the opening up of new developmental spaces internally so that we can take greater and greater perspectives on people and situations. And it needs to be driven by the power pack of will as well. So cognition leads the way, needs to be driven by will, and cognition always works at least a stage ahead of the other capacities. So we now go right into spiral dynamics. So 100,000 years ago, we had the beige level of spiral dynamics appear. So this is where humans were very instinctive. So this happens at the moment from age birth to about 2 years, 18 months, 2 years. It's instinctive in terms of it's just responding to tension in the body. So it's tension. I feel hungry, so I go and collect fruits and berries from the forest. I feel the tension of sex, so I go and find another human to procreate with. I feel the tension of cold in my body, so I go and find a cave. And with this level, human beings are traveling around in very loose packs, not really a tribe at this stage, and they'll be hanging around in areas where there is a decent food supply and a little bit of shelter. And at this stage, the human being, although it's in these loose packs, it's still a very individual within those groups. So it's a first individual stage. And what you'll notice within these, that each stage goes from an individual stage to a group stage and then back to an individual. So it goes from a masculine orientated phase to a more feminine to back to a masculine, this spiral dynamic as it goes up. So of course, with the problems of this stage are the world is still a very dangerous place. Nature's very much still in the raw, dangerous animals about, poisonous plants and insects. And also the human feels that tension to procreate as well. So humans start to come together about, you can see the evidence of this, about 50,000 years ago, and we get the purple level of spiral dynamics, where the individuals start to come together for the first time as the tribe. And so it's come together into a group consciousness level. it's also gone from having no spirituality whatsoever to this is the birth of the ego as well. So, and at this level, everything has spirits that must be placated. So you can still see this in some like Amazonian tribes and stuff nowadays around the world. It's all about the elders. The elders hold the rules in the tribe. It's very what's the word? Oh, I'm trying to think the word for it then. It's just gone from my mind. It's very superstitious level. So as you can see these levels come through, because if we get to adults, these levels are still sat within us. So they can sit in healthy or unhealthy forms as well. This is all about the family. It's very family orientated too. And of course, what happens at this level is that you've got tribes based in small areas. And again, with nature still being very powerful, you can have times of drought, you could have times of fire or flood. And what will happen in those times is that the food stores may have been washed away. And what the elders do at this sort of level is that if that sort of thing happens, they'll say, actually, we need to do more ritual to placate the spirits. And eventually what happens at this level is that that some, usually men, come out of that level and say, actually, the more ritual isn't feeding us, you know, we're starving, and what we're going to do is to go down river to that other tribe, and we're going to take their food, and we're going to go to war with them. And so you get the emergence 10,000 years ago of the red level of spiral dynamics, and this is the full-blooded expression of the ego, and a very bloody time in humanity. You can still see it today, you know, with like the rock and roll ethos, and in some organizations like the mafia. You still see it in some people who come up through tough inner city environments. These people have stepped out of the safety and security of the family and the tribe. The world looks a very dangerous place, and in that dangerous place I need to exert my willpower as powerfully and forcefully as possible onto other people to assume my own safety and success in the world. So all this level internally with the person, that they've just still got the one cognitive space internally. The red system, people operating from red, I'm sure you've come across people who are just still operating at red. Certainly if you've worked with anyone in social services or stuff like this, you know, clients, I mean, that they think about today. There's no long-term planning at all either. And of course, towards the end of this level, what happens is that the lives around these people end up getting very painful and very bloody usually. And often that bloodiness or pain starts to affect the family or the people close to them. And this is what brings about the next transformation, which about 5,000 years ago, we start to see the birth of the world's religions. And this internally is the birth of a new cognitive space opens up. And it's a good way to describe cognition, because it means that this was also the birth of love, because that extra cognitive space allows people to literally pictorially, reality is constructed pictorially in our minds as pictures. And if we can take an extra space and put ourselves into somebody else's shoes, we can love them. And before that, that's why it stays egocentric prior to that. And so what comes with that is the guilt, a very, very strong sense of guilt about the previous red lifestyle. And so this is where you get this, the birth of religion. And that previous red level is all about the charismatic leader going into battle against these other tribes. And of course, if that charismatic leader gets loses in battle and gets killed, the tribe may be massacred. So the success of the tribe is due to the lifespan of the charismatic leader. Now, when blue comes through, blue suddenly starts to understand that if you form a pyramidal structure, a hierarchical structure, and you have people at the top where you've got the person at the top, and then you've got a number of people, say 4 or 5 people underneath them, ready to take their place, that you can form structures that will absolutely annihilate red battle systems. and create stability and order within society. Of course, what you get is these ruling elites right at the top of those pyramids. They're extremely hierarchical and extremely rigid as well. And so this level, you also get the birth of religion, because rather than the truth being enforced by the charismatic, powerful leader, you get truth put into a book, which is the one true way. And interestingly, that within their own societies, that brings a lot of stability and order, until those societies meet another society that has a different one true way. Because then those societies go to war with each other. So you get things like the Crusades, which ironically is exactly the same worldview, but just with a different book. It's just fighting over whose rules shall win. So with structure, you get a lot of stability and order, but the problems with blue is that it tends to become a very rigid, hierarchical power structure, and generally very male dominated. And if you've got loads of talent in a blue system and you're a peasant, actually you're probably just going to stay a peasant. It's going to be really frustrating. And towards the end of the blue system, that in society, that it builds up this frustration in society, and you start to get the truth in terms of the book being challenged by people like Copernicus. And about 300 years ago, you get the birth of the orange worldview, another massive transformation internally, a completely new set of ideas, and the birth of achievement and rationality. So rather than truth being in the book, the truth is now discovered by, say, like Copernicus, studying the stars and saying, hang on a minute, is the sun going round us, or are we going round the sun? And it starts to challenge what's in the Bible, etc. And we start to get the birth of science as the source of truth. So can you see we're getting this emergence of truth, one from religious truth, now we're getting scientific truth, each one bringing greater and greater wholeness to humans. This begins in adolescence with people nowadays. You'll obviously know this is the biggest worldview in Western society at the moment, driven by, it's all about achievement. So orange, it keeps that pyramidical structure, but there's a lot more movement in the structure. So it starts to become what they call meritocracy. So that actually, if you're born into a very poor family and you've got loads of talent, you have actually got a chance of getting to the top of that pyramid. It's you can rise very, very far up, and this orange system starts to go around the world. It does start to use up a lot of resources wherever it goes. It also is rewarding. It's bringing back all the wealth that it creates, and it does create a huge amount of wealth. This level increased humanity's average lifespan by about 40%. So it's a huge step on in terms of humanity. Of course, we get education, clean water, medical systems, aeroplanes, trains, transport, all these benefits from the orange system. But it's also, as I say, it starts to reward its own societies, gives its reward back to Western societies. And in the end of the 50s and running into the 60s, there was academics who started to notice that there was real problems with this system, one of them being the environmental destruction, as Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. And there's also groups who are saying, actually, this is just rewarding one small part of society. So you got the emergence of the green worldview, which is about diversity and community. You got the civil rights movement with Martin Luther King, got the gay rights movement as well. And what it started to do was it started to say this pyramidical system is rewarding some, but there's loads of people at the bottom of the pyramid, and they're suffering, and those people need to be brought into the mainstream. So that's how we get the green view, which is very predominant today. Now, probably about 25%, 20 to 25% of adults in Western systems. So that brings us up to the end of green, and we can see that there's a new level emerging at the moment in small numbers, which is called yellow, second tier or integral, and it builds on this emerging building blocks of first tier systems. First tier systems have a characteristic about in terms of their movement from one system to the next. So people start to research, how does this transformation take place in adults? And what they found was this movement from level to level. People have a lens that is operational, which is controlling their lives. We've all got one at this moment that's running the show. And it's like it's sat, I think of it as like sat behind our head, running everything, controlling how we view and interpret life without us being aware of it. And it's subject to us, we can't see it. And when we have a transformation, that lens, first of all, we start to notice problems within our current worldview. We start to think, actually, that's not right. I used to think like that, but it's not quite right at the moment. We start to notice the shadow of our own thinking, and we start to notice it with other people around us. And eventually that suffering, the awareness of the shadow within it, pulls that lens from subjectivity and moves it to objectivity where we see it. And that's where we have a visceral transformation from subject, moving things from subject to object. And to give an example of that, if I was to, at the start of the presentation, give a description to you about that blue worldview, that traditional worldview, and said to the group, you know, what's the shadow of that traditional worldview that kind of forms nowadays in like the Catholic Church and stuff like that? People would probably say, oh, it's you know, words around, it's a hierarchical power structure. We can literally see the shadow of it. And if say that again around orange system, people say, oh, environmental destruction and bad redistribution of wealth. We can literally see the shadow of that system. And then when I was giving this up at Findorn, which is quite an advanced system, I'd say, well, what's the shadow of green? And there would be absolute silence in the room, because that was the operational level that people were functioning at. It was still subject to most of the people up there. So one of the main things about those first tier levels is that they're not aware that they're all part of the growth hierarchy, a growth structure, and they really strongly exclude each other. So you can see this in society at the moment, with particularly with green and orange, with you know, people have to have come through through orange to get to green. But of course, when they've come through the end of orange, they've come through it because they've become aware of the shadow of it. So they tend to reject the whole level. They throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's no longer anything good about that level. And so that they split off and they start to push away from each other again without recognizing that there's actually things to be harvested from each level. And again, if you look at that blue traditional group, you know, a lot of that group who voted for Brexit, about 40% of the United States are still operating mainly from this blue traditional level. This is the level that's tends to be quite nationalistic and my country right and wrong. And so these are the people that in rural areas have voted for Trump. And again, they're in a dynamic with this green level, which is, they don't recognize they're part of that same pathway. So what is to go into the shadow of green, so green is often called pluralism. So its sense of truth has moved from, you know, it's gone from religious truth to, it's gone to scientific truth, and then it's gone to pluralistic truth. And pluralistic truth is saying, oh, there's lots of people around the world in these different societies, and they have different upbringings and different languages and stuff. But you know what? Their truth is valid. They have a truth too. And it needs to be recognized and incorporated. So they say all truth is dependent on context. Therefore, all truth is relative. And so the phrase comes around in green systems. You often hear this, you have your truth and I have mine. And what happens with green, it has these things which are called performative contradictions, where it often contradicts itself in the same sentence. And if you look at the actual underpinning truth of this green system, that all truth is relative, all truth is relative is given as an absolute truth. So even if in its fundamental truth, it's got a performative contradiction that cannot sit together. So green is all about hierarchies and oppression. So it's saying that, you know, that there was a gender hierarchy of men over women, and that caused sexism. There was a hierarchy of skin color of white people over other people, and that created racism. And there was a hierarchy of countries over other countries, that created colonialism. So green hates hierarchy really, really strongly. And yet it gives its worldview in a very hierarchical stance. It loves telling everybody else that they're wrong. So it's, again, it contradicts itself all the time. And when you say to it, oh, that's very hierarchical, generally you'll get quite a reaction from that. So, and this hierarchy business really puts it into a tricky position, because also to become aware of hierarchies, people need to have got to green level or beyond. So when it's trying to stop all hierarchies, it actually ends up trying to stop the very pathway of getting to green stage consciousness. It starts to take away stepping stones on the developmental pathway. And there's people like Ken Wilber and Don Beck are saying that green is the most dangerous spiritual level that's ever been on the planet. Also, if you can't have hierarchies, how do you choose a direction? Because if you to start to judge things, you know, green also gets very judgmental about judging. So it's because it doesn't like the hierarchy. Why should one thing be judged high against the other? You need a hierarchy. But of course, we need to have hierarchies to make decisions. You know, doing one thing needs to be better than doing another thing. And so in green systems and with people at the very end of green, you can get this tremendous sense of stuckness where they've got options of things to do, but they don't know which way to go. And then they start going one way and then they go, oh no, I should have gone the other way. And they end up just getting stuck. And that also, that power pack of will is sat there going, okay, let's decide which way to go. And that lack of being able to choose a direction, lack of hierarchy, it freezes up will, because will is sat there saying, tell me which way to go in, and it just gets frozen up down there and stuck, a part of this stuck energy. It also means that you can't tell people at green what to do. It means that it's really hard to manage those people if you're in systems and you've got a job where you might know the job really well, and they might have just started out. We have a lot of this at, or did have at Findorn. Someone comes in and they tell you, oh, this needs to be done like that, and they can get quite offended because, of course, if you're telling someone what to do, you're immediately introducing a knowledge hierarchy again. So that kicks up a little bit of reaction to that too. Diversity. So again, living at Findorn, it's a very green eco community. So you know, there's people turn up of all sexual orientation. People don't mind what skin color they are. There's even a few wizards rock up each year, and they're all welcome. In fact, everyone's welcome as long as they're green. And so green talks all the time about diversity and inclusion, and is actually the most exclusive level of all of them. It will not accept people with other worldviews, and that includes integral. It really fights against. It doesn't know what it's fighting against, but it really will block out the next level as well. So it has this very hypocritical stance as well. Equality. Green wants to have an outcome of equality all the time, but it doesn't care if it's completely unequal in getting to its outcome of equality. You know, so it's and what it'll do. So I'll give an example of Findorn, where Findorn insists on giving everyone the same level of pay, even though there's people within that system. Some people are quite wealthy, some people are quite poor but have real skills to offer, but they end up leaving the community because they have to go and earn some money. And but everyone has to be equal. And what this means in society, this obsession with equal outcomes, is that people can't actually be met where they're at. It means that we can't be compassionate to people in society who are not equal because they're having a really bad time. And, you know, by being able to look at genuinely compassionately and say, actually, some people are much better off than others, because that's how it is. We are not all equal. We are all different. Again, it's one of these performative contradictions of just saying we're all equal. Well, we're just not. You know, it's just, it doesn't match up with reality. It's an enemy of compassion. So as I mentioned before, it starts to take away the stepping stones on the developmental pathway. So it becomes a really big spiritual problem, green. Green really wants to create world peace. But if you think about most of the planet is not at green, most of it's at this red, orange, and blue levels, which green rejects. So how does it actually talk to those people and put in the next part of the developmental pathway? Because levels can't be jumped. You know, there has to be the stepping stones in place. And green meetings, I'm sure you've been to these green meetings, which are all about people just expressing their feelings. Often nothing gets achieved with the meetings apart from everyone saying hello and what they're feeling about what somebody else says. And then you come to the end of the meeting, nothing's been decided apart from, oh, let's have another meeting in a couple of weeks. And this can be okay if it's done in people's free time, but done in an organisation, at Findorn, this is literally financially killing the organisation, because they're having massive meetings to try and, ironically, get over their addiction of meetings. And it's just killing the place at the moment. And you also get quadrant absolutism. So you can see that there's this breakthrough. Religious truth and experiential truth is like shamanic truth, early stage. So you can see there's relationship between the quadrants and the levels. So this is kind of like a personal truth. Then it went to like the religious truth. We're going to put it in the external plural area. So religious truth sits here. Then we had scientific truth. One person studying the outside world gets the truth. And of course, what happens with green is there's this breakthrough to people's feelings, this internal, like personal and group stage, this pluralistic truth. So what you get is like, oh, my feelings are the truth. So it's really good to be in touch with our feelings, but actually there are other forms of truth as well that of course need to be honored. And but we start to get this, this kind of need for safe spaces and stuff like that, because you can't challenge my feelings. You can't challenge me in an argument because you might upset me. And so that could be a bit of a problem. So green systems, as I've been mentioning, green systems repress these other levels. So you find people who have hung around a lot in green systems, they tend to squeeze out orange, they squeeze out red power. So you can see these two tend to be more masculine flavored levels. These ones are more feminine flavored. So you tend to get, at Findorn, the people I've tested with spiral dynamics, get loads of heavy green, bit of blue, and then loads of purple as well. So this purple level comes through as this, it could be a lot of like shamanic practice and stuff like that, which I'm quite into myself, but it becomes like that this is, this has got more wisdom in it than science and stuff like that, which I don't buy. I think science has got a lot to offer as well. So you start to get this repression in systems. Therefore, it runs out of money because orange produces all the money. So green is great at spending orange money, often from families who mum and dad can often have produced the orange money, and then the green children go away and spend all the orange money to the horror of the parents, and while the children are criticizing the capitalist system that they're actually feeding off. So you get this, again, quite a hypocritical stance with it. And you get what's happening with Trump and stuff at the moment. You get this numerically exclusive leading edge. So you can see this with Corbyn's supporters in the UK as well. And I'm not taking any political side here. I'm very much a centrist. It's just what's happening. Where green is, green has this, often it's got this red level heavily repressed internally. So it's very kind and gentle to its own other greens, but it can be very, very aggressive and hostile to other levels. And so those levels get really upset by it. And so this egalitarian values, when green starts to shove it really hard onto blue systems, people are still at blue, this traditional blue. These are people who voted for Brexit and voted for Trump. These people start to feel threatened by that because they can't see it, it's not their experience. And they start to move to the right, to start to say, actually, we don't want this green. They don't know they're talking about value systems, but they'll say these liberals, these city-based liberals. And so you start to get this energetic movement of people. And of course, the numbers are still very much at orange and blue in society. So then you start to get these shock election results of like Trump, and you get Brexit as well. And of course, green starts to go quite crazy about these election results because it's horrified at these values re-emerging and it cannot see that it's played a huge part in creating these very systems. These very Trump for me is an expression of the reaction towards Greens, how vociferous it is at pushing its agenda. So from shadow awareness to a new system, how do we break through? As I say, I'm going back over there to that, the shadows of the previous system that helps the movement through to yellow. And so yellow integrates the previous levels into a flexible flow. It recognizes that each level has a quality to harvest, and it brings together that left and the right in politics, and sees that actually they're just stepping stones on a pathway, and each side has good things to offer. So yellow becomes very, very self-expressive again, very autonomous. So self-expressed to serve the whole. And as new second tier truth, there are relative truth and absolute truths. So some truths have a relative context and they're therefore relatively true. Some truths have a universal context and are therefore universally true. And each level contains a partial truth. So the big universal truth is that reality consists of holons. So a holon is something that's a whole while simultaneously being part of a greater whole. Everything is a holon. And we can see this as an example with our body, that quarks come together. They are a holon that comes together in greater complexity to form atoms, that comes together to form molecules, cells, organs, and bodies. We can use it again with like a book as well. So letters come together to form words, to form sentences, to form paragraphs, chapters, and books. So each one of these exhibits a greater level of complexity that isn't there if you just take the parts away and have the parts as a separate self. It exhibits a greater level complexity and wholeness. And you can find out where things sit in these holarchies, whereby if you took away a part of it, say where I take away paragraph there, everything above it ceases to exist, whereas things below it will still survive. And what you can see in society at the moment, we've got a situation whereby green is eroding away previous value systems and is threatening the very future of everything above it, including green itself. So holons emerge in holarchies of increasing complexity. So a holarchy it actually looks exactly the same as a hierarchy, except it's not top down, it comes from bottom up. It emerges. This is how nature produces things. And this is where second tier management of systems moves from management of systems to coaching, so that we're coaching actually people up and through systems. And holons have 4 drives. So each holon has a drive for self-transcendence, the drive to move towards the next level of complexity. It also has a drive for agency, to maintain itself as a self within its pressures in the environment. This self-transcendence and agency are masculine characteristics. And holons also have a drive for communion and embrace or agape. So these are more feminine drives. So the communion is to commune and maintain good relationships with the other things around it at its same level. And it also has this drive for embrace or agape, where it needs to embrace the previous holons that make up itself, because if it gets one of those wrong, it actually destroys itself. So these are fundamental levels, and you can see the different levels have different characteristics of these drives. You see green has massively over drive towards communion. So it's all about creating a greater and greater whole. It's a bit like the EU, and it needs to break through that. It needs to bring in more of this eros drive, this agency, and this autonomy to kind of break through that. And that's where you get this kind of horizontal level, vertical level, horizontal, vertical, this movement up and through. So just moving on to the last few slides. This is part of the service that I offer. So I do spiral dynamics testing with full reports so that people can find out their levels. This is a typical person from Findorm. So you can see they're operating largely with green value systems, and they've got massive red rejection because being angry or showing any sort of power is illegal in green systems. Nothing likely to get you chucked out of that system, and cold-shouldered quickly enough. And you can see this rejection of orange, and this guy has been running out of money and wondering why he can't get his kind of mojo back together again. And he's also kind of got this this big family orientation. He's a lovely guy to chat to, but also really quite superstitious as well about this kind of shamanic zone, which is, as I say, I always find fascinating now. But you can see this system come up. So what's interesting is that when I tested this bit, these rejected elements, so we got chatting towards who triggered him. And of course, think of a politician who triggers this guy perfectly is Donald Trump. Donald Trump has these red and orange levels in a way that's accepted so high that it's really unhealthy. So he will trigger these two rejected parts of him. And of course he can, when I was chatting to him before the test, and he could see this part, this bit above the line, but this bit below the line he wasn't aware of at all, really. And when we start to get down towards this big red rejection, its relationship with green, the dynamics between the two, and I was asking him, what's it like if you really express your power in that system? And he goes, "Oh, I've done it once or twice before," and it was the feedback was brutal, for him to not do it again. And this is quite sad because, of course, it means that the healthy sense of power can get lost along the way. We also match that with a change state indicator to see where people are at in terms of change in their life, because people can have the same spiral stack but have completely different life conditions. Some people madly up for change, some people not. There's no point doing coaching programs for people who are not really up for changing. And then you can also do these things, so we can look at group values put together in organizations, and then how they interact with the culture and the structure of the organization. So we're starting to do organizational development from interior stages and structures of consciousness, which means can save masses in finance, time, and wasted energy actually within systems. And a good book to read if you're interested in, if you're feeling the movement from going beyond green, if you recognize that's where you're at, and you're looking for something to really move that green system from subject to object. Boomeritis by Ken Wilber is excellent for doing that. That's good. And that finishes off the presentation. So thanks for listening, because that's quite intense, that delivery. And we can move on to some Q&A if you've got any. And any comments or feedback.
Real quickly say what was in the last two slides, because my computer died, it got overheated.
Oh yeah, so there was I'll just share the screen again. So yeah, those last two were, so that one in change state indicator. So this is when people do the spiral dynamics testing, we can see whether their lives are stable in certain areas. If people are really up for change, and because of course that means that their life conditions, things are not going well, something's not right, we can test for that, and we can start to see if they're going into a little bit of tension internally. Sometimes, especially if people are going through a whole level change, then they start to go down to here, which is called gamma, which means they get into stagnation, quite often a bit of depression, because they just can't break through. And that is the thing just before a breakthrough of vertical worldview. Often this can be managed with more horizontal development, and they can move through smoothly to this kind of turbulent change, but move through to a new alpha, new system. But this is, at Findorn, there's loads of this gamma at the moment, so they're having tremendous difficulty breaking through. And you can see this again, this is what I think is happening with the EU at the moment as well. It's down here, it doesn't quite know what to do. And because the new consciousness isn't there, it means it's surrounded by wicked problems. And of course, when people do eventually have a breakthrough through this barrier here, they have a breakthrough zest, and they're flying for a few years because they're very, very empowered. So that's the change state indicator. And then I also do an integral organizational analysis where you can look at organizational systems. This is in line with the work with Frederick Laloux. I've done a bit of work with him directly about what happens, when you get someone who's operating at second tier and they get put in charge of organizations. You get tremendous difference in how that organization starts to operate, with a lot more trust, actually. And what this whole report, there's a whole report goes with this, breaking it down into ever more granular detail. But you can see a group value profile. So how does the group stack up in terms of its values? How does that relate to how it sees the culture and the structure of the organization? And then that report goes into deeper, how would they like to see the structure? So it means that you start to get granular detail about where to start to create change, because when people start to create change in systems, usually it's like, oh, let's throw a load of mud at the wall and see what sticks. And of course that it costs a load of money, it creates a load of frustration. Whereas if you can look at the value systems of people internally, you can start to find out, one, do we need to address a life condition to create development of a new value, or can we move through in a more sophisticated way and a quicker way that actually people won't react against? If that makes sense. The last one was about boomeritis as a book that really helps that movement from green to yellow. It is quite a brutal read, and you just got to kind of keep going. It deconstructs green in a massive way. I love it. I think it's a great book. It's quite funny too. Yeah. Great. So as I say, it's quite intense to deliver that, and I imagine it's quite intense to receive it too. And so I'd be interested to know, what your thoughts are around that, whether that's landed or flicked any switches at all, or whether you got any questions or comments about it.
Shall I take the lead? Thanks for that, Jonathan. Appreciate it. Can you hear me all right? Yeah.
Yes, I can.
Yeah. No, thanks. It was quite a lot of information, but I think I was following it just about okay. Yeah. Is it possible you can pull up one of the slides as I'm asking the question?
Definitely.
Can you pull up, the actual spiral, with the different colours?
Yeah.
Like the model, the like overarching model.
Yeah, the original one.
Yeah, the original.
Yeah.
All right. So basically, because I'm just trying to summarize it just so it makes sense. So like the first stage is the masculine, because that's like the externalization. It's the individual, right? Yeah. So that's effectively like when a baby comes out the womb. It's like externalizing as a point. Yeah. And then it moves into like the purple, which is the feminine. Yeah. It moves into purple, and then it has to come back and then bring the whole thing through with it. So that's why you see almost politically, you see like an emergence of one state of consciousness, and then it's almost like it feels like it regresses, but it's actually going back and then integrating and including and moving through with both of it. Is that? It's a really good point that you've made that I should have mentioned in the presentation, actually, is that all these are like waves, so that as a new wave comes through, it actually subsumes the previous wave, it transcends and includes. And the previous value systems, it doesn't go away, but it kind of gets really affected by it. And
at some level, this is why green is so interesting, because green is the one that comes through and then it takes those previous levels, and for 3 of those levels it pushes them out the way, you know, and those levels are still sat within people, but they get really heavily repressed. And what you can see is that in societies, they say it takes about 10% of society, a nation for example, to go through to the next level, and that starts to have an enormous effect on the whole, every previous system, because those next levels that are coming through have a tremendous amount of influence on those because they are the leading edge, you know, it's the leading thinkers and stuff, and they start to have huge influence on society. So as we're going up those levels, we can never see above ourselves, and that's why one of the problems of green is that because yellow integrates all previous levels, including green, but it integrates red, blue, and orange that green doesn't like. So when green meets integral, all it can see are those 3 levels that it doesn't like. So it interprets that as you're not at green, therefore you're less developed, therefore I'm going to fight you. And the irony being that actually we had a little integral pod at Findorn that came under sustained attack up there because you know, we were holding some of these red, orange, and blue levels. So and the green wouldn't have they'd pigeonholed us as being you know, something to fight against. And
we've all met those people, don't worry. We've met a load of those people. It's like, so basically green has to go back and like embrace and integrate like the masculine qualities. To be able to bring the whole thing through.
One of the interesting things, because I know you're interested in gender as well, is that as this moves up the gender lines, as these levels develop, are up into and including orange tend to stay quite classical. There's a little bit of a mix over at orange, but you know, you tend to get lower down, very distinct, you know, masculine energy, male bodies, feminine energy, female bodies. At green, there's a crossover takes place. So you start to get, because of course with the hierarchies previously, you know, the female thinkers in the 60s were saying actually there is a hierarchy here, so we need to empower females. But the irony within it is that female empowerment actually becomes a huge bringing in of masculine energy often into female bodies. And you can see this in some of the political leaders at the moment. And so actually it can still, at the end of it, become dominant masculine energy in a female body. And
so it's still blue. So it's basically still operating as blue.
Yeah, can well do. Yeah. And of course, what you get is a lot of men in those greens. For a man to go into green system, you know, usually I remember when I went from orange to green, I went through quite a shameful period, I think, about like kind of, oh, what have men done, you know, and stuff like this. And I was quite a strong feminist for quite a while. And then I started to realize, you know, the deeper psychological aspects to that. But what you find out, say for example at Findorn, you've got a lot of men who seem to have cut off from their natural masculinity. And of course I went to an integral conference last year in Europe, and there was because those kind of crossover lines seem to relax again at integral, and that kind of gender dynamic at integral for me is much more relaxed sense, and you know, genuinely non-judgmental.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, I know, thanks for that. I know that is Dan still there? Because Dan, I've heard you often talk about, like, in your own life you've gone through like pendulum swings. I think I've seen you write this, and I just wanted to know if you maybe had any like thoughts on what you've heard, because you've often talked about like you've gone from one extreme to the other, and I wonder if just by listening to this talk, that's brought any clarity to your own insights. I'll mute myself now.
It was such a great visualization for where I see my own journey, and maybe just ego masturbation to think I'm yellow right now, but I do think that because I've always recently I've seen myself, like you said, harvest all the levels. I feel like I do that. Like I always look for what I can take from something.
Yeah.
So I did actually have a specific question. I love the model you've got up on the screen right now because it implies that there's stuff above yellow. And so I feel like, well, let's skip ahead. What's the shadow of yellow? Because I feel like I'm in yellow, but I also feel like a dissatisfaction, partly in sometimes in communicating with the other levels. I've worked with like criminal offenders who are right down at the sort of caveman end of the spiral, and I've worked with plenty of people in the green and sort of, you know, like male apologists and stuff, and people who are sort of, not only are they stuck at the level, but they seem to want to be stuck. They're presented with everything they need to see the shadow, and they choose to remain stuck, and that frustrates me. I wondered if that was kind of what you might call the shadow of yellow, or what your thoughts on the shadow of yellow were. Yeah,
I think for me, I think the shadow of level, the shadows of yellow. There's a number that I'm vaguely aware of, and because this is like the shadow side of it, I'm a little bit experienced at, but I've certainly not broken through any higher than that. You know, personally, just to state that, and also that just also to be aware that with coaching and stuff like this, is that breaking, you know, it's very difficult to get people to break through those levels unless they're right at the end of that kind of stage. We had it with a few people at Findorm that was in so much suffering at the end of green that they just started to pop. But I think yellow, one thing that for me at green that gets really, really squashed is the cognitive line. And, you know, the green becomes quite, again, a performative contradiction of green is that it becomes anti-expertise and anti-education and stuff like this, because, of course, that's hierarchical again. And of course, it's often come through as a reaction from orange, you know, it's too scientific, it's always thinking about stuff too logical. So I think that yellow structure is very cognitive. It's very, very cognitively powerful. And I think one of the shadows of that, and I'll name this for myself, is that it can start to lose its embodiment. And I think the embodied aspect is really important. And I think it can also become, and also I'll name this with myself, is that it, as levels come through, especially in their early stages, they'll generally go through a stage where they're quite disgusted with the previous level. And you get, you know, there's something called the mean green meme, where it's kind of rejects orange very powerfully. There is also a bit of the mean integral meme, which I've definitely had, still have a little bit of, like, you know, really getting stuck into all of green. And of course, there's loads of green that is fantastic, and it has created a much, much better society. So I would say the kind of almost like that lack of embodiment and the mean green me. There's also, I think nowadays, I think it's also it's still quite a lonely level, because there's not many people through it. You know, there are bods coming out of green, but it's like at Findorm, you know, Findorm's quite leading edge. There's not many up there who are really kind of through it and on the other side. And this is where, but I'm starting to notice them starting to come together really in certain little groups and stuff like this. So it's finding each other, I suppose. Yeah.
I think you just nailed it. Like, that describes like my last year. It's something I wanted to share because I just think that you'll love it. I had a email, we'll call it debate argument really, with a former client of mine, very strong-minded feminist.
Yeah.
And we'll often have these debates where the key point we're making is the same. We agree on the actual point. But a common one will be, say, around sexual assault. We often have debates around sexual assault. Mm-hmm. And a common thing that I'll give across is actually say blaming all men actually contributes to increased assault rates.
Yeah.
So you're shooting yourself in the foot with that approach. It doesn't matter whether you're right or wrong. It just matters to statistics. And what I find that she's like, no, first we blame men, then we figure out what works, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's just, it drives me crazy. I'm like, I used to work with guys who sexually offend. It's their shame that leads to it. You're contributing to that. So I always had that loneliness at Yellow, and also this kind of frustration where you can clearly see the benefits, but you can see why you're clinging to all the other stuff. Like, let go of that and you'll be sweet. You've got all this great stuff going on, yet you cling to this. Yeah, it's like somebody having all the answers, but they refuse to apply them just out of some sort of stubbornness. So anyway, you hit the mark for me there. I just thought that was that was spot on.
So it's a bit like what you seem to be mentioning is this victim Olympics that takes place at Green as well, where I can put myself at the top of the hierarchy by being the biggest victim, and people get addicted to their stories, and because it gives them power, and I mean that's two of the big ones there that you're touching on about this performative contradiction, whereby in the 60s and 70s was this emergence of identity politics, where people started to, with small groups, and actually it was quite well-meaning at first, of these groups who were starting to study these little groups to show how oppressed they were. And a lot of them were very oppressed. But of course, those Green doesn't recognise how successful it's been in empowering a lot of these smaller groups. And these smaller groups are now quite powerful, and are now starting to want like special privileges for that special group. And what it's doing, it's alienating the mainstream. And of course, we've got like the emergence of the far right and stuff like that, which for me is a response to this Green kind of identity politics. And of course, Green again is getting very angry about it, and they're going like, "Hang on a minute, there's a dynamic relationship here," and but trying to have that conversation is very delicate and very tricky. Yeah, I think you found out too. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, just my last thing, I think one of the shadows of Yellow is I can't resist having those conversations. And they're fucking pointless. Like I said, we end up agreeing on the same point.
Yeah.
So that didn't need to happen. And I wish I had spent my time, helping more people transition to whatever the level's going to serve them best. And yet I just have to argue with these people. It just drives me crazy. And I don't know if that's me personally, or if that's like an offshoot of, that over-analysis, the cognitive.
What would be really interesting was seeing like, if you did an analysis on your spiral stack, because of course none of us are perfect. It's all a work in progress. So like, and finding out where your red level's sitting, because that red level loves a bit of a fight, so it's that could be still quite active within you. So it's quite active for me.
Like a pointless fight for some reason. Distraction from hard at work, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. I enjoyed this.
An
image to thoughts I've had. It's great.
Yeah. And this is why this spiral zone, and this is what people could get you can get a pretty good idea. I bet everyone on this call has got a pretty good idea of what levels their predominant operating system, and but the interesting thing is the dynamics, and like of course it's people who have had wild backgrounds or very difficult childhoods and stuff like that. Some of those early levels can be really, really like out of in tricky situations, and becoming aware of that, because of course it's like you can become aware of if you have some shadow behavior, deep shadow behavior, if it's to do, a lot of them to do with food, to do with sex, to do with power, we can find out at what age did that trauma take place, because it's related to the level, so that you can see that a trauma at a certain growth stage can create a massive rejection of a level, or somebody who has created a trauma with someone else, with a child, if they're carrying a very heavy level themselves, again, that level the child cannot meet, in adulthood, when it meets anybody who's carrying that in a strong way. Of course, the memory bank kicks in on a level that we're not even aware of, and creates a massive dislike reaction, an allergy, get away from me, so it's this is where this can be used on a very deeply therapeutic level as well. Yeah.
Well, I think you just gave me a massive insight about, I'm always looking at connection, and you get that people who rub you the wrong way and they've done nothing to deserve it. As soon as you meet them, you're like, no, not you. Yeah. And I do wonder, if you were to sort of put them through the test, if you'd just be able to, at almost a subconscious body language reading level, be able to spot a spike in one of these areas that conflicts with your own.
This is it. And what we can do with those is, like, if we find something, the testing gives an insight to where a conversation should go. And so when we start to find out, say for example, someone's got, they've got a large repressed red area, and they're finding that that's causing a lot of problems at work. I had this one guy, said, I get so angry at work, but I can't express it, so I'm having to go leave the conversation. And so a question around that is, okay, so let's not do it at work. Let's find a sport or something that you go and do where you can start to harness that in a healthy way. Go and do some martial arts and go and do a bit of boxing or something like that, or just anything that gets out that red drive in a safe way, and then you can start to bring that into the workplace in a much more relaxed form. So it's very, very useful. Yeah,
absolutely. I'll stop hogging you now. Let someone else have a go. Well, that's been very helpful.
Yeah, great.
Hi. Okay,
Hello.
I go next. Hi. Couple of questions.
Yeah.
One in relation to the yellow area.
Yeah.
So I'm a bit like this, like you say, this psychological masturbation, as Dan sort of put it.
Yeah.
I think potentially I'm dipping into the yellow.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious, have you met people who potentially were born in the yellow and the other parts of the levels of consciousness were pulling them back in, if you like? Because I've always felt like I can always see all sides of an argument. I've always never been... I've always been this very understanding kind of level of consciousness throughout my entire life. Yeah. And I feel like society pulled me back into the other levels.
Yeah.
And I can integrate some of the levels, but I find a resistance to some of the what I call the matrix stuff, the hierarchical stuff as well.
Yeah. So what I'd say is that all the evidence shows that everybody grows up through these levels. But what I haven't gone in hardly at all into this presentation is about state development. And state development people can have non-dual experiences at any stage. It can just happen. And it's a bit mysterious about how that does happen. And of course, children are kind of, can have access to very creative states, which are certainly at least at, subtle energy states. So, and some, quite a lot of people, my best friend has got he's got a real kind of, he's got a bit of a gift where he's a lot of the time he seems to me he's in this kind of subtle energy field, and sometimes in a bit more. And this might be something related to yourself, where there's this, all these stages looked at through a higher subtle stage will look very different, to their interpretation will look different. And one of the interesting things to note with all of this, so as I say, the healthy growth model is to transcend and include each one. In fact, we have to eventually. We've got to include the rungs of the ladder, if you like. And of course, when we go through some sort of pathology, it's with a transcend and exclude, or we exclude a level. We also can do that with states. So states also come in stages, like with stages, our perception is always a mixture of a number of stages together. We'll have a leading stage, but it's actually a mixture. Whereas with states, it's different. States are exclusive. It's like you can't be drunk and sober at the same time. So you can be in a subtle state of consciousness, and you can be kind of away from gross consciousness. And say, for example, Findorn has got a bit of a pathology around this. So it's like where they're quite green, so they've cut off a few of the stages, but they're also doing massive spiritual practice, and their spiritual tradition is nature mysticism, which is all about subtle state stage. And what it means is that there's a bit of a resistance to become really grounded, you know, the gross, and because they've just got there's people there practicing all the time to stay in subtle state. And so that's why when someone, I'm quite a grounded personality. So when I come in and kind of go like, bum, 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 they go, no, and it's just like, oh, you need to do more meditation. And that actually, you're saying actually there's something called the Wilbur-Coombs lattice where you can actually put this onto a graph, like stages on one side and states on the other, to see how much of life's potential are you actually living in. You know, how big is your world, you know, in terms of the state and the stage. So that's like, as I say, because it's almost another presentation to this, but the states are really, really interesting when you start to get into them.
Yeah, that makes sense. Another question I've got, I won't hog it.
Sure.
I work with some survivors of satanic ritual abuse.
Yeah.
So you're talking trauma day in, day out from inside the womb, and perpetrated, and mind control and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious, have you experienced working with anybody with such severe trauma utilising this model?
No, not utilising this model. No. No, not something that deep. I used to work a lot on the care farms where we did have, I used to work a lot with drug rehab and homeless people. So there's quite severe stuff there. But I was actually just doing the farm work and just the conversational bit with them rather than the intense. Good on doing that.
And do you think this model could be utilised for severe trauma?
Interesting. So the whole integral model, I have left out another couple of pieces. So the integral model as a whole is growing up, waking up. So that's states and stages. It's showing up. So kind of your will to kind of show up with stuff. And it's also cleaning up. So the cleaning up part is to say that when people have trauma, this sort of stuff probably won't touch it, you know. So it's that, you know, integral is very, very keen on all kinds of body works and emotional release work and stuff like that. And in fact, it's saying, especially when people are getting, that stuff comes on stream at green, that people start to get involved with that. And so there's this, and as we go further into like yellow and stuff like that, there's people have to get more and more of it. I know I went through a stage of doing loads of that myself personally, and I think it's really important. I think the energetic body works and stuff like that. What do you do for people in that sort of?
Typically, I utilise something called EFT matrix reimprinting, but I've been organising some conferences with a lady called Sandra Fect, who's a psychotherapist from Canada, and she does something called swaying and muscle testing. So a lot of kinesiology in it, and it's like it tends to get to hidden memories. Yeah. And I'm I'm doing some research to train as many therapists as possible to help this group of people, because I think once we heal this group of people, it impacts the whole of our consciousness collectively. Yeah, definitely. I agree. Yeah. I think there seems to be, for me, there's a lot of this stuff is still held in that nervous system and possibly even deeper. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Right, thank you. Lovely.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan, and we're all very grateful for you for doing that, and thanks for everyone for coming on at such late notice as well.
Thank you.